Welcome back to Mr. Cursed. I've got 9 crazy true stories from people who went camping in November and lived through absolute hell. These aren't made-up scary tales. This stuff really happened in the Appalachian Mountains. After hearing these, you'll think twice before going into the woods alone. Before we start, smash that subscribe button and tell me, have you ever experienced something weird while camping? All right, guys, turn off those lights. Time to hear some real nightmares. I was 26 when this happened, working as a veterinary assistant down in Charlotte. Me and my boyfriend Danny had been together about 2 years, and we'd been talking about taking a real camping trip for months. Not the kind where you stay at some crowded KOA with bathhouses and Wi-Fi, but proper wilderness camping. Danny worked construction and had been putting in 12-hour days all summer. I'd been pulling double shifts at the animal hospital because 2 of our techs quit right before flu season. We were both running on fumes, snapping at each other over stupid stuff like who forgot to buy milk or whose turn it was to take out the trash. Danny found this spot on some hiking forum, a primitive campsite about 40 miles off the Blue Ridge Parkway, accessible only by an old logging road that hadn't seen maintenance in probably a decade. No facilities, no cell towers, just a clearing beside Blackwater Creek with a stone fire ring that looked like it had been there since the Depression. The photos he showed me looked perfect, tall hemlocks creating a natural cathedral, the creek running clear over smooth granite, mountains rising up on all sides like the walls of some ancient fortress. We loaded up his Chevy with enough supplies for 3 days and headed out on a Friday afternoon in mid-November. The drive up was gorgeous. Autumn was hanging on in patches, some trees still blazing orange and red, others already bare and gray against the sky. We had to stop twice to move fallen branches off the logging road, and by the time we reached the campsite, my hands were stiff with cold. The temperature was dropping fast, and there was that particular smell in the air that meant serious weather was coming. Danny got the tent up while I gathered firewood, and we had a good blaze going by the time full darkness settled over the woods. That first night was exactly what we'd needed. We cooked hot dogs over the fire, shared a bottle of wine, talked about everything except work. Danny seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him in months, and I remember thinking we should do this more often. The only sounds were the creek running over stones and the occasional hoot of an owl somewhere up in the canopy. I fell asleep listening to Danny's breathing and the gentle crackling of the dying fire. Saturday was perfect. We hiked about 5 miles up an old trail that followed the ridgeline, found the ruins of what might have been a homestead, just a stone foundation and the remains of a chimney, everything else reclaimed by Virginia creeper and wild grape. Danny took pictures with his phone while I poked around looking for artifacts. Found a few pieces of blue glass that might have been from mason jars and a horseshoe that was probably 50 years old at least. The kind of peaceful day that makes you forget civilization exists. It was Saturday night when things started going wrong, though I didn't recognize it at first. We'd built up the fire again and were roasting marshmallows for s'mores when I noticed the complete absence of sound. No owls, no rustling in the underbrush, no insects, nothing. Even the creek seemed quieter, like the water was moving through cotton. I mentioned it to Danny, but he just shrugged and said maybe we'd scared off the wildlife with our voices. Then we heard the clicking. It started around 10:30, coming from somewhere in the trees behind our tent. A rhythmic tapping sound, like fingernails drumming on wood, but with a pattern to it. Tap, tap, pose, tap, 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 pose. Almost like Morse code, but not quite. Danny stood up and grabbed his flashlight, scanning the tree line, but the beam just disappeared into that wall of dark between the trunks. Probably just a woodpecker, he said, but his voice had that forced, casual tone people use when they're trying to convince themselves more than anyone else. The clicking continued for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse, thick and waiting, like the woods were holding their breath. We went back to our conversation, but I kept catching Danny glancing toward the trees. When we finally decided to turn in around midnight, he spent longer than usual banking the fire, making sure we had plenty of coals for morning. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of scratching. Not on trees, on stone, like claws or fingernails being dragged across the granite that ringed our fire pit. Danny was still asleep beside me, breathing deep and even. I lay there listening, trying to convince myself it was just a raccoon or possum investigating our campsite. But the scratching had that same rhythmic quality as the clicking, deliberate, and almost musical. Then I heard footsteps. Not the heavy thud of boots or paws, but something lighter, more careful. They moved in a circle around our tent, always staying just outside the ring of dying firelight. I counted the steps, 12 paces in one direction, pause, 12 paces back, like something was studying us, learning the layout of our camp. I shook Danny awake and whispered what I was hearing. He listened for a moment, then unzipped the tent flap just enough to peer out. The footsteps stopped immediately. We waited there for maybe 20 minutes, but everything had gone quiet again. Danny said it was probably just a deer checking out our scent, but I noticed he kept his hand on the flashlight for the rest of the night. Sunday morning felt normal at first. Coffee over the rebuilt fire, bacon and eggs in Danny's cast iron skillet, plans to pack up and head home by noon. But when Danny went to get water from the creek, he called me over with a strange tone in his voice. "Jess, look at this." Our camping chairs had been moved. Not dramatically. They were still arranged around the fire pit, but they'd been turned to face outward into the woods instead of toward each other. The cooler had been shifted about 3 feet to the left. Danny's boots, which he'd left beside the tent, were now placed neatly side by side about 10 feet away, toes pointing toward the tree line. "Maybe we just forgot," I said, but I knew we hadn't. I have a thing about keeping campsites organized. It's a habit from growing up with my father, who was military. Everything had its place, and I remembered exactly how we'd left things. That's when Danny found the tracks. They were in the soft mud beside the creek, about 20 feet downstream from where we'd been getting water. Definitely not deer or bear. These looked almost human, but wrong. The toes were too long, and there were what might have been claw marks extending from each digit. Most disturbing was their size, maybe 7 or 8 inches long, suggesting something tall enough to be dangerous, but not quite human proportions. "We should pack up," I said, and Danny nodded without argument. We broke camp quickly, stuffing gear into bags without our usual organization. I kept feeling like we were being watched, though every time I turned to look, the woods appeared empty. Just trees and shadows, and that unnatural quiet that had settled over everything since Friday night. We were loading the last of our gear when the clicking started again. Daylight made it somehow worse. The sound was definitely coming from something in the trees about 30 yards away, but I couldn't see what was making it. Danny finished throwing bags in the truck bed while I stood there scanning the canopy, trying to spot movement. The clicking seemed to be moving, first from one tree, then another, like something was swinging or jumping between branches. "Get in the truck," Danny said quietly. I was reaching for the passenger door handle when something dropped out of the hemlock directly above our campsite. It landed maybe 15 feet away, and for a moment, it just crouched there studying us. About 4 feet tall when hunched over, with grayish-green skin that looked wet or slippery in the morning light. Its limbs were too long for its body, arms that could probably reach the ground even when it stood upright. But the worst part was its face, or what passed for a face. Huge black eyes that seemed to take up half its skull, no visible nose, and a mouth that was just a horizontal slit until it opened. When that mouth opened, it extended outward like a tube or proboscis, revealing rows of tiny needle-like teeth. The thing made a soft, hissing sound and tilted its head, studying us with an intelligence that was unmistakably alien but clearly cunning. Danny and I both froze, not from any conscious decision, but because our bodies simply stopped responding to our brains. The creature's gaze seemed to pin us in place, and I could feel my heartbeat slowing, my breathing becoming shallow. Some kind of paralysis was spreading up from my feet, and I understood with crystal clarity that this thing was deciding whether we were worth the effort to hunt. It took a step toward Danny, and that's when my paralysis broke. I don't know if it was adrenaline or terror or just pure survival instinct, but I grabbed the tire iron from the truck bed and swung it as hard as I could. The thing hissed and scuttled backward on all fours, moving with that horrible spider-like grace that suggested its joints bent in ways ours couldn't. "Go, go, go!" Danny shouted, and we both dove into the truck. Danny's hands were shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. The creature had moved back into the trees, but I could see it watching us from between the trunks, those black eyes reflecting the morning sun like obsidian mirrors. When the engine finally turned over, it made that clicking sound again, louder now, more urgent, like it was calling to something else. We drove that logging road faster than was safe, Danny white-knuckling the steering wheel while I kept watch through the rear window. About a mile from the campsite, I saw it again, running through the trees parallel to the road, keeping pace with the truck even though we were doing at least 30 miles an hour. It moved through the forest like it had been born there, never slowing for obstacles, never losing its footing on the rough terrain. Only when we reached the main highway did I stop seeing movement in the trees. The drive home was mostly silent. What do you say about something like that? We both knew what we'd seen, but talking about it would have made it real in a way that neither of us was ready to handle. Danny kept checking the rearview mirror, and I noticed his hands didn't stop shaking until we were back in Charlotte traffic. That was 3 weeks ago, and we still haven't talked about it properly. Danny's been having nightmares. He wakes up around 2 a.m. almost every night, always claiming he heard scratching sounds outside our apartment. His appetite's gone to hell, and he's lost maybe 15 pounds. I've been doing research online, trying to find similar encounters, and what I've found isn't comforting. Turns out there are dozens of reports from that general area, going back to the early 1900s. Cherokee stories mention something they called the November crawler, a creature that emerges from cave systems in late fall to hunt before winter. Forest Service reports document unexplained disappearances of hikers and campers, always in November, always in remote areas. Most unsettling are the medical examiner reports I found from the 1,970 seconds. Bodies discovered with precise puncture wounds and evidence of severe anemia, though with minimal external bleeding. I think we got lucky. Whatever that thing was, it was hunting, and for some reason, it decided we weren't worth the effort. Maybe we were too alert, too ready to fight back. Maybe it preferred victims who were asleep or alone. I don't know, and honestly, I don't want to know. We've canceled our camping plans indefinitely. Danny sold most of our gear on Craigslist, and I don't think he's been in the woods since that Sunday morning. Sometimes I catch him staring out windows at night, and I know he's listening for that clicking sound. I still work with animals every day, see all kinds of creatures, both domestic and wild, brought into the clinic, but none of them move the way that thing moved. None of them look at humans with that calculating, patient intelligence that suggested it understood us far better than we understood it. I don't know what we encountered up there in those mountains, but I know it's still out there, waiting in the trees, watching the trails, marking territory with scratches on stone and rearranged campsites. November's almost over now, and maybe it's gone back to whatever cave system it calls home. But next year, when the leaves start turning and the temperature drops, it'll emerge again, and it'll be hungry. I'm 42 years old, and I've been guiding hunters through the Jefferson National Forest in Virginia for the better part of 2 decades. Name's George Tucker. And if you've ever needed someone to show you where the big bucks bed down or which ridges hold the most turkey, chances are you've heard my name around these parts. I run a small outfitting business out of my cabin near Roaring Run. Nothing fancy, but I know these mountains like the back of my hand. Every game trail, every water source, every spot where a 10-point buck might stop to rub his antlers come November. At least, I thought I did. This all happened last November, during what should have been the best week of my guiding season. November's prime time for deer hunting, OBS. The rut's in full swing, bucks are moving during daylight hours, acting stupid with hormones. That's when the city folks come calling, wanting to bag their first whitetail or finally get that wall hanger they've been dreaming about. I had this accountant from Richmond, Jake Morrison, booked for a 5-day hunt. Kid was 28, never been hunting before, but he had good gear and seemed eager to learn. The kind of client I actually enjoyed working with, respectful, listened to instruction, wasn't just looking to blast away at anything that moved. We set up base camp near one of my favorite spots, a natural funnel where deer move between bedding areas and water. I'd been using this location for years, had probably guided 30 successful hunts through there. Jake was nervous but excited, kept checking his rifle, even though I'd already shown him how to use it safely about 10 times. The weather was perfect, crisp mornings, clear skies, just enough wind to cover our scent. Everything was going exactly like it should have. The first sign something was off came on our second morning out. I was checking some game trails while Jake practiced with his shooting sticks back at camp, and I found tracks that didn't belong to any animal I knew. Lived in these woods. They were canine-like, but massive, 6 inches long with claw marks extending 2 inches past the pads. The depth of the impressions told me whatever made them was heavy, probably 200 pounds or more per animal. And there wasn't just one set. I counted at least 6 different tracks, all moving in what looked like a coordinated pattern. When I showed Jake, he figured they were just large dogs, maybe someone's hunting hounds that had gotten loose. Made sense, except no domestic dog I'd ever seen left prints that deep or moved in formation like that. These tracks showed intelligence, purpose. They weren't wandering around looking for food or following scent trails randomly. They were hunting something, and they were doing it as a team. That evening, we heard the howling. I've been in these mountains long enough to know every sound the local wildlife makes. Coyotes, sure, we've got plenty of those. Black bears will vocalize sometimes, especially during mating season. But this was different. Deep, resonant calls that seemed to carry an almost human quality to them. They weren't the high-pitched yipping of coyotes or the rough bark of domestic dogs. These howls had words hidden in them, if that makes any sense. Like someone was trying to communicate something important, and they were using their voice to do it. Jake wanted to investigate, grab his flashlight, and go see what was making all the noise. I kept him in camp. 20 years in the woods teaches you when something isn't right, and everything about those sounds set off alarm bells in my head. The calls were coming from different ridges, answering each other in patterns that felt too organized to be random animal behavior. It was like listening to a conversation you couldn't quite understand. The next morning, we found a deer carcass about 100 yards from our camp. Fresh kill, probably from the night before. But here's what bothered me. It hadn't been eaten. Whatever killed it had examined the body, maybe tasted it, then left it behind. The wounds were clean, precise, like the animal had been taken down by something that knew exactly what it was doing. But predators don't usually kill just to kill. They eat what they catch, or at least cache it for later. This felt more like research. By our 3rd day, I knew we were being watched. The pack had circled our camp during the night, staying just outside the ring of light from our fire, but close enough to keep tabs on us. I found their tracks in the morning, a perfect perimeter around our sleeping area. They'd been there for hours, just watching us sleep. Jake was getting nervous, talking about cutting the trip short and heading home to Richmond. I should have listened to him. That afternoon, while we were sitting in a tree stand waiting for deer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Jake was looking east through his binoculars when movement caught my eye to the south. What I initially thought was a deer stepping through the undergrowth suddenly stood up on its hind legs. Not like a bear rearing up to get a better view. This thing rose smoothly, naturally, like standing upright was just another way it moved. It watched us for maybe 30 seconds. Then dropped back down to all fours and disappeared into the forest faster than anything that size should have been able to move. Jake had missed it completely, still scanning the wrong direction. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. Part of me was hoping I'd imagined it, that the stress and lack of sleep were making me see things that weren't there. But deep down, I knew better. Something was out there, something that could choose how it moved, depending on what it needed to do. And it was studying us. That night, they spoke to us. Jake was asleep in his tent when I heard footsteps circling our camp. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped just outside the range of our fire. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it toward the sound, and that's when I saw him. The pack leader, I guess you'd call him. 7 feet tall when standing upright, covered in dark gray fur that looked almost black in the firelight. His head was wolf-like but larger, more intelligent than any wild animal's should be. But it was his hands that really got to me. Human hands with opposable thumbs, fingers that could grip and manipulate objects just like ours. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. His eyes reflected my flashlight like a dog's, but there was something behind them that felt ancient, patient, calculating. This wasn't some rabid animal acting on instinct. This was something that understood what I was, what I represented, and was making a decision about what to do with me. When he finally spoke, his voice was gravelly but clear. "Leave the forest. This is our season." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were threatening, though they certainly fiddlemander. They were. but because they were so perfectly articulated. This thing had a vocabulary, syntax, the ability to communicate complex ideas. It wasn't mimicking human speech, TUI. It was using language as a tool, the same way it used its hands and its ability to walk upright. Jake never woke up during the encounter. When morning came, I told him we needed to pack up and head out. He was relieved, ready to get back to civilization and his normal life. But when we tried to leave, we discovered the pack had blocked every trail leading back to the main road. Fallen trees that hadn't been there the day before, rock slides that looked too convenient to be natural. They were herding us deeper into the mountains, away from help and witnesses. For 2 more days, we played a game of cat and mouse with creatures that were smarter than we were and knew the terrain better than I did. They let us think we were making progress toward escape, then quietly cut off our route and pushed us in the direction they wanted us to go. Jake was panicking, wanted to fire his rifle at anything that moved. I managed to keep him calm, but barely. We were dealing with intelligent predators, and wasting ammunition on warning shots would only make our situation worse. On our 5th day in the woods, the pack leader approached our camp alone. This time, he didn't hide in the shadows or rely on intimidation. He walked straight into our firelight, hands visible and empty, in what I can only describe as diplomatic behavior. He explained that November was their breeding season, when they mated and raised their young. Human activity in the forest during this time disrupted their natural cycles, endangered their offspring. They'd been protecting this territory for generations, ensuring their survival the only way they knew how. He offered us safe passage out of the forest in exchange for our agreement to spread a warning to other hunters. Stay out of these particular mountains during November, and there wouldn't be any more problems. Jake agreed immediately, desperate to get home and forget this whole experience. But I'm a professional guide. Word gets out that George Tucker's hunting grounds are off limits for a month, and my business dies. Looking back now, I realize how stupid I was to hesitate. The pack leader seemed to understand my dilemma because he led us to a clearing I'd never seen before, despite 20 years of exploring these mountains. Human bones were scattered around what looked like an old campsite. Some of them were recent, maybe from the last few years. Others looked decades old, possibly older. All of them belonged to people who'd probably made the same choice I was struggling with. I took the deal. The pack escorted us to the forest boundary, a line of marked trees that I'd somehow never noticed before. The leader warned us never to return during November, and made it clear that the warning extended to any other hunters we might bring to the area. They'd been watching us for years, he said. They knew our patterns, our favorite spots, even our names. This wasn't a new arrangement. It was an old one that I'd just been too blind to see. Jake never went hunting again. Last I heard, he'd moved back in with his parents and taken a desk job that keeps him in the city year-round. He won't talk about what happened, won't even acknowledge that he knows me if we run into each other somewhere. I can't blame him. Some experiences change you in ways you can't undo. As for me, I retired from guiding that winter. Sold my business to a young guy from West Virginia who thinks he knows these mountains better than I do. I never told him about the November restrictions. Halsey figured he'd learn soon enough, or maybe he'd be smart enough to listen when the pack gives him the same warning they gave me. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. I still live near the forest, but I don't go deep into the woods during November. Haven't for 3 years now, and I don't plan to start again. Some people think I'm getting soft in my old age, scared of shadows and jumping at every sound. They're welcome to think that. I know what's out there, and I know they're still watching. Every November, when the hunting season reaches its peak, I stay home and find other things to do. To this day, I can hear them howling sometimes, usually around the full moon. The same deep, resonant calls with their almost human quality. They're still out there, still protecting their territory during breeding season. Still making sure that people like Jake and me remember our place in the natural order of things. I don't talk about this much, and I've never put it in writing before now. Most people wouldn't believe it anyway, and those who might believe it probably shouldn't be encouraged to go looking for proof. But if you're planning a hunting trip to the Jefferson National Forest anytime soon, maybe consider scheduling it for October or December. Instead, November belongs to them now. It always has. I'm 24, and work retail at a sporting goods store in Knoxville. The pay's terrible, but I get discounts on camping gear, which is basically the only reason I stay. Last November, me and 3 friends from work decided we needed to get away for Thanksgiving weekend. Sarah's a nurse and had been pulling double shifts at the ER. Mike delivers pizzas and hadn't taken a real day off in 2 years. Jen works at this coffee shop downtown and was losing her mind dealing with cranky customers every day. We all just needed to disappear for a few days, you know? Cherokee National Forest seemed perfect. Remote enough that we wouldn't run into crowds, but still close enough to drive back if we needed to. I'd been camping in those mountains since I was a kid with my dad, so I knew a good spot about 3 miles off the main trail. We loaded up Mike's Honda Civic with way too much gear and drove out there on Thursday afternoon. The weather was perfect, crisp but not freezing, clear skies, that kind of fall day where everything smells like wood smoke and dying leaves. We set up camp in this little clearing, I remembered, surrounded by these massive oak trees that had to be 100 years old. Sarah brought a decent first aid kit since she's medical. Mike packed enough ramen and hot dogs to feed an army. And Jen brought this fancy camp coffee setup that probably cost more than my rent. Everything felt normal those first few hours. We got the tents up, built a fire, cracked open some beers. Mike was telling stories about the weirdest pizza deliveries he'd made, and Sarah was venting about this patient who'd come into the ER convinced he'd been bitten by a vampire. We were laughing, just decompressing from our regular lives. The sun went down around 6, and that's when I started noticing things were off. First, it got quiet, like really quiet. When you're camping, you expect to hear owls, insects buzzing around, maybe a raccoon rustling through the underbrush. But there was nothing. No cricket sounds, no birds, not even wind through the trees. Sarah mentioned it first. She said it reminded her of those moments in the hospital right before someone codes, when everything just stops. We joked about it, figured maybe we'd picked a spot where the wildlife was just naturally sparse. Then our phones started acting weird. All 4 of us had full batteries when we set up camp, but by 8 o'clock, they were draining fast. Mine went from 80% to dead in maybe 10 minutes, and I hadn't even been using it. Mike's did the same thing. Jen tried to take some photos of the fire, and her phone just shut off mid-picture. Sarah's lasted the longest, but even hers was down to like 15% by the time we decided to turn in for the night. That's when I found the bones. I was walking around the perimeter of our camp, just checking to make sure we hadn't left any food out that might attract bears, when I spotted them in my flashlight beam. Deer bones, arranged in these perfect spirals around the base of 3 different trees. Not scattered like you'd expect from a predator kill or natural decomposition, arranged, like someone had taken the time to lay them out in specific patterns. The bones were completely clean too. No meat, no cartilage, nothing. They looked like they'd been sitting in a museum display case for years. I called the others over to look. Sarah knelt down to examine them more closely, and that's when she said something that still gives me chills. She said in all her medical training, she'd never seen bones that clean unless they'd been professionally processed. These weren't just picked clean by scavengers. There was no marrow left inside them. They were completely empty, like something had sucked the life right out of them. We decided it was probably just some weird natural phenomenon, maybe the result of a really harsh winter or something. None of us wanted to admit we were starting to feel genuinely unsettled. We banked the fire and went to bed around 10, but I don't think any of us actually slept much that first night. The next morning, Mike volunteered to hike back to the main trail to see if he could get cell service and let people know we were okay. He'd been gone about 2 hours when he came stumbling back into camp, looking pale and confused. He said he couldn't find the trail. Not that he'd gotten lost on the trail. He couldn't find the trail at all. The markers we'd followed in were gone, and his compass was spinning like a broken toy. Every direction he walked seemed to lead him in a circle back to our camp. That's when we started to realize we might be in real trouble. We spent the rest of Friday trying to find a way out. All 4 of us hiked together, following what we thought were game trails, but they all seemed to peter out or loop back on themselves. Jen's compass was doing the same thing Mike's had done, spinning wildly, pointing different directions every few seconds. The GPS on Sarah's phone, when it was actually working, showed our location jumping around randomly, sometimes placing us miles from where we actually were. By Friday afternoon, we'd found more bone arrangements. Not just deer bones this time, rabbits, squirrels, even what looked like the skeleton of a bear cub, all laid out in those same spiral patterns. Everything was drained completely clean, just like the first ones we'd found. Sarah counted at least 15 different kill sites within a half-mile radius of our camp. Whatever was doing this had been hunting in the area for a while. That evening, Jen spotted something watching us from the tree line. She was sitting by the fire, trying to get her phone to charge off Mike's portable battery pack, when she went completely still and pointed toward the woods. About 50 yards out, barely visible in the dying light, something tall and gray was standing between two pine trees. At first glance, it looked almost human, upright, roughly the right height, but the proportions were all wrong. Its arms hung down past where its knees should be, and its torso was too narrow, like someone had stretched a person vertically without adjusting the width. We all saw it. For maybe 10 minutes, it just stood there, perfectly motionless, watching us. Mike threw a rock in its direction, and I swear the rock passed right through it like it wasn't even there. But then it moved. Not walked, exactly, but flowed from one tree to another, always staying just at the edge of our vision. That night, none of us even pretended to sleep. We kept the fire burning high and took turns keeping watch, but the thing stayed out there in the darkness, circling our camp. We could hear footsteps in the dead leaves, slow and deliberate, like it was pacing. Every so often, we'd catch a glimpse of it in the firelight, that impossible gray shape, always just beyond clear sight. Around 1 a.m., Mike's phone buzzed. Somehow, it had powered back on, and there was a text message in the draft folder that he swore he hadn't written. "It's in my head," telling me to come outside. He deleted the message, but an hour later, it was back. Same words, same draft folder. Sarah made him give her the phone, and we watched it happen again. The message would appear, we'd delete it, and it would return. Always the same text. "It's in my head, telling me to come outside." By dawn on Saturday, Mike was gone. His sleeping bag was empty but still warm, like he'd just gotten up. No signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away from the tent. His phone was sitting on his pillow with that same message glowing on the screen. We called his name until our voices were hoarse, but the forest just swallowed the sound. Sarah found his body around noon. We'd been searching for him all morning, and she was checking a ravine about a quarter mile from camp when she started screaming. I ran over, and there he was, lying at the bottom of this shallow creek bed. He looked exactly like those animals we'd been finding, completely drained. His skin was gray and papery, and when I got close enough to check for a pulse, I could see his chest still rising and falling, but his eyes were still moving. He was alive, but empty. Just a shell. The worst part was when he saw us looking down at him. His mouth moved, and I could see him trying to form words. "Help me," he mouthed, over and over. "Help me." We couldn't get down to him. Every time one of us tried to climb into the ravine, we'd lose our footing and slide back up, like the slope was moving on its own. It was like the thing wanted us to see what it had done to Mike, wanted us to know what was waiting for us. That's when Sarah came up with the plan that saved our lives. She said we needed to follow the stream. Water always flows somewhere, and even if the thing could mess with our compasses and move the trails, it couldn't change the basic laws of physics. Water had to flow downhill toward the main river systems, eventually toward civilization. We grabbed what we could carry and started hiking downstream, staying in the creek bed as much as possible. The thing followed us, but it seemed weaker in the daylight, less solid. We could see it moving through the trees parallel to the stream, but it kept its distance. After about 4 hours of walking, we saw power lines. Then we heard traffic. The thing stopped following us at the edge of the tree line, like there was an invisible barrier it couldn't cross. We made it to Highway 441, flagged down a ranger, and told him we had a missing hiker in the woods. They never found Mike's body. The search and rescue team said there was no ravine in the area we described, no creek bed that matched our directions. According to their maps, the terrain was completely different from what we'd experienced. They found our campsite, but all the bone. Arrangements were gone. Our gear was neatly packed and sitting in a pile, like someone had cleaned up after us. The official report said Mike had wandered off and gotten lost, probably fell into the river and drowned. Case closed. I quit camping after that. Sarah transferred to a different hospital in another state. Jen moved back home to live with her parents. We don't talk anymore, not because we're angry or anything, but because none of us want to remember what happened out there. Sometimes I'll drive past the Cherokee National Forest on my way to visit family, and I'll get this metallic taste in my mouth, like sucking on pennies. I still work at the same sporting goods store. People come in all the time asking for advice about camping gear, about the best spots in the mountains. I always recommend they stick to the established campgrounds, the places with rangers and other people around. When they ask why, I just tell them the wildlife can be unpredictable. I've never told anyone the whole story before. Honestly, I'm not even sure why I'm telling it now. But if you're planning to go camping in Cherokee National Forest, especially in November, just don't go alone. And if you find bones arranged in spirals around your campsite, pack up and leave immediately. Don't try to rationalize it. Don't convince yourself it's natural. Just leave. Some things in those mountains are older than we are, and they're always hungry. Back when I was 29, I thought I had my life figured out. I was working as a wildlife biologist for the Tennessee Department of Natural Resources, had just gotten engaged to my college girlfriend Sarah, and we'd saved up enough money to buy a little house outside Knoxville. That November was supposed to be my last solo research trip before settling down into what Sarah called real adult life. Desk work, mortgage payments, and weekend trips to Home Depot instead of the mountains. I wish I'd listened to her. The project seemed routine enough when Dr. Martinez handed me the assignment. Hunters across Cherokee National Forest had been reporting strange deer migration patterns throughout October, and the department needed someone to document what was actually happening out there. Nothing was where it was supposed to be. Deer showing up in areas they'd avoided for decades, abandoned their usual feeding grounds, and moving in groups that made no biological sense. The old-timers who'd been hunting these mountains since they were kids kept using the same word: wrong. Everything felt wrong. Sarah wasn't happy about me spending 3 weeks alone in the backcountry, especially right before Thanksgiving. "Can't someone else do it?" she asked while I packed my gear. "You've got nothing left to prove out there." She was standing in the doorway of our apartment, arms crossed, watching me stuff trail cameras and batteries into my hiking pack. The morning light caught her auburn hair just right, and I remember thinking how beautiful she looked when she was worried about me. "It's just documentation work," I told her, which was true enough. "Set up some cameras, collect data, write a report. 3 weeks and I'm done with fieldwork forever." I kissed her forehead and promised to call every night from my satellite phone. Besides, you know how much I love camping in November. Nobody else out there but me and the deer. Looking back now, I realize that last part should have been a warning. I set up my base camp on November 8th, about 2 miles into the forest along an old logging road that hadn't seen vehicle traffic in at least a decade. The area felt perfect for the research. Game trails, multiple game trails converging near a seasonal creek, good elevation for observing animal movement patterns, and far enough from any hiking trails to avoid human interference. I pitched my 4-season tent in a small clearing surrounded by oak and maple trees, their bare branches creating a natural canopy overhead. The first 2 days went exactly as planned. I positioned 12 trail cameras across a 50-square-mile area, programming each one to record 30 seconds of footage whenever motion was detected. High definition, infrared night vision, solar charging, GPS tracking, NX, the works. I also set up a weather monitoring station to track environmental conditions, since temperature and pressure changes can affect animal behavior in ways most people don't realize. Each evening, I'd hike back to camp, heat up a freeze-dried meal on my camp stove, and call Sarah on the satellite phone. She'd tell me about her day at the veterinary clinic. I'd tell her about deer tracks and camera placement, and we'd talk about our wedding plans for next spring. Normal conversations about normal things. The kind of mundane happiness you don't appreciate until it's gone. The first footage I reviewed looked typical for November deer activity. Does and yearlings moving through established corridors, a few bucks still showing territorial behavior, some raccoons and possums doing their nocturnal thing. The weather was stable, clear skies, light winds, temperatures dropping into the 30s at night. Perfect conditions for observing natural animal behavior without environmental stressors. Then, I watched the recording from camera A1, timestamped November 10th at 3:22 a.m., A large oak tree walked across the frame, not swayed by wind, not falling, walking. The massive root system moved beneath the soil like legs, the trunk maintaining perfect balance as it repositioned itself 15 feet from its original location in smooth, deliberate steps. The movement was fluid, organic, purposeful, like watching a person stretch and move to a more comfortable position, except it was a tree that had to weigh several tons. I stared at my laptop screen until my eyes burned. I checked the timestamp, verified the camera settings, examined the file for corruption. Everything was normal except for the impossible thing I was looking at. I must have replayed that 30-second clip 100 times, each viewing making it seem more real and more impossible at the same time. When I hiked out to camera A1 the next morning, I found the evidence I was dreading. Deep impressions in the soft earth where the root system had pressed down to support the tree's weight. Not random upheaval from erosion or soil settling. Deliberate footprints, if you can call them that. The kind of tracks you'd expect from something massive and careful about where it placed its weight. The tree was exactly where the camera showed it had moved to. That night, I called Sarah as usual, but I didn't mention the footage. How do you tell the person you love that you've documented something that violates every law of botany and physics? Instead, I talked about the weather and asked about her day. Her voice sounded so warm and normal through the satellite phone's static, like an anchor to the rational world I was starting to doubt. "You sound tired," she said. "Are you getting enough sleep out there?" "Just the usual camping insomnia." I lied. "You know how it is the first few nights." "Well, don't push yourself too hard. The deer will still be there if you take a break." If only it were just the deer. Camera C4 captured similar footage at 5:47 a.m. the same night, a pine tree moving between two stationary trees with the same fluid, purposeful motion. But this recording showed something that made my blood go cold. The tree paused for several seconds, rotated slowly, then turned toward the camera. Not randomly, deliberately, like it knew it was being watched and wanted to look back. The weather station showed no wind activity during either recording. No seismic events, no environmental factors that could explain what I was seeing. I sent anonymized clips to colleagues at the University of Tennessee, keeping the files stripped of metadata and location information. The responses ranged from equipment malfunction theories to suggestions about rare fungal infections affecting root systems. Dr. Patel from the forestry department was the most helpful. "I've heard of sudden root displacement events," he wrote back, "but nothing quite like this. The movement patterns suggest some kind of coordinated behavior, which would be." He paused in his email, then continued, "Well, it would be unprecedented in botanical science." That's when I started researching Cherokee folklore. The Cherokee call November the hunger month, when the forest prepares for winter and the old spirits wake up to gather what they need for the long, cold season ahead. According to the stories, some trees can walk during this time, not all trees, just the ones connected to what they call the deep root network. These mobile trees are scouts and hunters for the ancient forest, sent out to find nutrients and energy that the entire ecosystem needs to survive winter. I'd always dismissed folklore as primitive superstition, but after watching 7 trees move in single-file formation across a ridgeline like a hunting party, I started taking those old stories very seriously. Camera B2 captured that footage on November 11th at 11:15 p.m. 7 trees of different species, D-oak, pine, maple, hickory, roll bod, all moving with coordinated purpose through the darkness. They avoided rocky areas where their roots couldn't penetrate. They stuck to soft soil and followed natural contours like they understood terrain navigation. At one point, the lead tree stopped at a small creek and extended its root system into the water, not drinking like an animal would drink, but absorbing water directly through expanded root networks that spread across the creek bed like veins. The other trees waited while the lead tree finished, then continued moving in formation. By November 12th, I realized the trees could change their appearance while moving. Camera A3 recorded a large maple shifting from full autumn foliage to bare winter branches in a matter of seconds, apparently using this transformation as camouflage to blend with surrounding vegetation. Other mobile trees began mimicking the same bare appearance, creating a coordinated disguise across the entire group. That's when I started to feel genuinely afraid. The trees were learning my routine. Camera D1 showed 3 mobile trees positioning themselves in a triangle, with formation around my campsite on the night of November 12th. They remained perfectly motionless when I was active, chopping wood, preparing meals, moving around the clearing. But the moment I zipped myself into my tent and settled down for sleep, they began to move. Slow, careful movements, circling closer to my tent, testing the perimeter of my campsite like predators evaluating prey. I woke up the next morning to find massive root disturbances around my food storage containers. Deep penetrations in the soil where something had been probing, testing, learning the contents. My bear canister had been moved 3 feet from where I'd left it, rotated, examined. The aluminum surface showed scrape marks from what looked like root tips, exploring every surface. They were studying me. The most disturbing footage came from camera B4 on November 13th at 4:17 a.m. I watched a group of mobile trees feeding on a dead deer. The deer showed no signs of predator attack, no claw marks, no bite wounds, no evidence of struggle. Instead, there were multiple puncture wounds where roots had penetrated the carcass with surgical precision. The trees drained the entire deer in 47 minutes. Root networks extended from multiple trees, working together to extract every bit of nutrition from the carcass. When they finished, only hide and bones remained, picked clean more thoroughly than any scavenger could manage. The other mobile trees gathered around the feeding site like pack animals sharing a kill, their root systems intertwining underground in what looked like a communication network. This wasn't plant behavior. It was coordinated predation. That night, I tried calling Sarah, but the satellite phone wouldn't connect. No signal, no GPS lock, nothing. I checked all the connections, replaced the battery, repositioned the antenna. The device was working perfectly, but it couldn't find any satellites to connect to. Like something was interfering with the signal. I was being isolated. By November 14th, the mobile trees had learned to avoid my camera positions entirely. They moved just outside detection range but left clear evidence of their passage. Fresh soil disturbances, where trees had been planted in new locations during the night. When I hiked out to investigate, I found root network patterns in the exposed earth that looked like neural pathways, branching and connecting across vast distances underground. The entire forest was wired together like a single organism. That afternoon, I tried hiking back to my truck to get help, but the trail was different, not obviously wrong, just shifted. Landmarks I remembered from my hike-in were in slightly different positions. The creek crossed the path at the wrong angle. The old lightning-struck oak that marked the halfway point was gone entirely, with no evidence it had ever existed. I was lost in a forest I'd mapped myself just 6 days earlier. Camera B1 captured the final piece of the puzzle at 1:55 a.m. on November 15th. The mobile trees had formed a barrier between my campsite and what should have been the trail back to my truck. Not a random placement, a deliberate blockade. Every possible escape route was systematically blocked by repositioned trees that had moved during the night. They were herding me toward a specific location, the old growth section of the forest, where the massive centuries-old trees stood like ancient monuments in cathedral silence. I grabbed my emergency gear and headed for the old growth area, partly because I had no choice and partly because I needed to understand what was happening to me. The air grew thicker as I approached the ancient trees. Like breathing through wet cotton, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in the span of 100 yards, and my breath came out in visible puffs, even though it was barely 40 degrees outside. The old growth trees were enormous, some of them easily 4 feet in diameter. Their canopies so dense they blocked out most of the sky. But it wasn't their size that made me stop walking. It was the silence. No birds, no insects, no wind through the branches. No sound except my own heartbeat and breathing, amplified in the unnatural quiet. That's when I saw the mobile trees arriving. They emerged from the forest in groups of 3 and 4, converging on the old growth area from every direction. Oak, maple, pine, hickory. Dozens of trees walking through the forest with fluid, coordinated movement. Each one carried something in its root network. Deer carcasses, small animals, organic matter I couldn't identify. Nutrients for the ancient trees. The old growth trees were the colony queens, and the mobile trees were their hunters and gatherers. I watched from behind a massive boulder as the mobile trees approached the ancient ones and extended their root networks into the soil around the old-growth trunks. A transfer was taking place, Kelding Boder, nutrients flowing from the mobile trees into the vast underground network that connected the entire forest. The ancient trees were feeding, growing stronger, preparing for winter through the efforts of their mobile extensions. The root system extended for miles underground, connecting hundreds, maybe thousands of trees into a single vast organism. The Cherokee were right. The forest itself was alive, intelligent, and very, very hungry. That's when one of the mobile trees turned and looked directly at me. Not in my general direction. At me. It had sensed my presence, despite my hiding place, despite my attempt to remain motionless. The tree began moving toward my position, and I heard something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. It was calling my name, not speaking like a human would speak. The sound came from the creaking of wood, the rustle of leaves, the grinding of bark against itself. But it was definitely my name, repeated over and over in a voice that sounded almost like Sarah's. Michael, 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 I ran. Behind me, I could hear them pursuing, not just one tree, but dozens. The sound of massive root systems moving through soil, branches scraping against other trees, the organic creaking and groaning of mobile wood giving chase. They weren't fast, but they were relentless, and I could feel them coordinating through their underground network to cut off my escape routes. The forest itself was hunting me. I crashed through underbrush, leaped over fallen logs, stumbled down hillsides in the growing darkness. My GPS was useless, just spinning wildly, unable to lock onto my position. My compass spun in circles. Even the stars looked wrong. Constellations I'd known since childhood rotated out of position or missing entirely. The trees kept calling my name in Sarah's voice. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I saw lights through the trees. Real lights. Electric lights from the parking area, where I'd left my truck. I burst out of the forest into the parking area and found my vehicle exactly where I'd left it, covered in a week's worth of fallen leaves, but otherwise untouched. Behind me, the forest was silent again. Normal. The mobile trees had stopped at the edge of the woods, invisible among their stationary brothers. Waiting, I threw my gear into the truck and drove straight through the night back to Knoxville, not stopping until I was in my own apartment with Sarah's arms around me. She was awake, worried sick because I hadn't called in 3 days. According to her, I'd been missing for 72 hours. According to my memory, I'd been in the forest for 7 days. When I tried to explain what had happened, I discovered that all my trail camera SD cards had been wiped clean. Every single recording was gone, replaced by hours of static footage showing normal forest scenes. No mobile trees, no coordinated hunting behavior, no evidence of anything unusual. Even my research notes had been altered. Pages that I'd written were in different handwriting, describing perfectly normal deer migration patterns and routine animal behavior. I submitted my report to the department, but officially, the project was classified as incomplete due to equipment failure. Too many variables, unreliable data, inconclusive results. I was reassigned to desk work, analyzing other researchers' field data. Sarah and I got married that spring as planned, but things were different between us. She knew something had changed in me during those missing days, something I couldn't explain or understand myself. I stopped sleeping well, stopped eating meat, well to you. The thought of it reminded me too much of what I'd seen the mobile trees doing to that deer. Stopped going camping or hiking, even on our honeymoon. I couldn't stand being around trees. We moved to Phoenix 2 years later, where Sarah got a job at a large veterinary practice, and I found work with the Arizona Game and Fish Department. Desert wildlife research. No forests, no old-growth trees, no November hunting seasons. Just cactus, sagebrush, and open sky as far as you can see. But every November, I have the same dream. I'm back in Cherokee National Forest, hiding behind that boulder, watching the mobile trees feed the ancient ones. And in the dream, I don't run when they call my name. In the dream, I walk toward them, let them take me into their root network, become part of the vast organism that connects the entire forest. In the dream, I'm finally home. Sarah doesn't know about the dreams. She doesn't know that sometimes, on November nights when the desert wind is quiet, I can still hear them calling my name in her voice. She doesn't know that I've been researching property records for Cherokee National Forest, looking for old growth sections that match my memories. She doesn't know that I'm planning to go back this November. The hunters were right about one thing. Something is definitely wrong in those woods during the hunger month. They just didn't understand that wrong and right are human concepts. The forest doesn't care about our categories. It only cares about survival, growth, and the ancient patterns that have existed since long before humans walked these mountains. I still work as a wildlife biologist, but I understand now that there are forms of life we're not equipped to study or classify. Some ecosystems operate on principles that challenge everything we think we know about biology, botany, and the natural world. The Cherokee understood this. They knew that November was when the forest became something else, something older and hungrier than the sum of its individual trees. I should have listened to their stories. I should have listened to Sarah when she asked me not to go. But most of all, I should have run faster when I had the chance, because next November, I'm not planning to run at all. I'm 29 years old and work park maintenance for the state of West Virginia. Been doing it for about 3 years now, mostly keeping trails clear and fixing up the campsites around Monongahela Forest. It's honest work, pays decent, and I get to be outdoors most days. Name's Marcus, by the way. I grew up around these mountains, so when I finally got some time off last November, I figured I'd do what I'd been wanting to do for months, get out into the real backcountry and see what was out there beyond the tourist trails. See, we'd been having some weird issues at work. Someone or something kept leaving these massive footprints around our equipment sheds. 18 inches long, deep as hell, perfectly formed like nothing I'd ever seen. My boss figured it was just vandals messing with us, maybe using fake feet or something. But I'd grown up hearing the old stories, and these prints looked way too real, too heavy, too purposeful. I'd been getting into some online forums about cryptids and unexplained stuff, mostly just curiosity at first. But the more I read, the more I wanted to see for myself. So I saved up and bought some military surplus gear. Night vision scope, motion-activated cameras, solar charging station, the works. Figured if something was really out there, I'd document it properly. Got permission from my supervisor to set up an extended camping trip in a remote section of the forest, about 15 miles from the nearest road. Told him I was doing some unofficial wildlife observation for the department, which wasn't exactly a lie. I packed enough supplies for a week, loaded up my truck, and drove out to the trailhead on November 4th. The spot I picked was perfect, a small clearing near a creek, surrounded by dense hardwood forest, with good sight lines in every direction. I spent most of the afternoon setting up my cameras, 4 of them total, each with motion detection and infrared capability. One covering my tent perimeter, one watching the north tree line where the forest got really thick, one at the creek crossing about 50 yards out, and one monitoring my supply cache. By the time I had everything running, it was getting dark. I made some dinner, checked my camera feeds on the laptop, and posted on a few forums that I was finally doing my first real investigation. Got some encouraging replies, a couple people warning me to be careful, the usual stuff. I felt good about it. Professional, you know? Like I was finally taking this seriously, instead of just reading other people's stories. First night was quiet. Almost too quiet, if I'm being honest. I grew up in these woods, and there's always something making noise, owls, raccoons, branches creaking. But that first night, it was like someone had turned off the sound. Just the creek babbling and my own breathing. Around 9:47 p.m., my laptop chimed with a motion alert from the north treeline camera. I pulled up the footage, expecting to see a deer or maybe a bear. Instead, I watched the trees along the ridge start swaying. Not randomly, like they would in wind. In sequence, like something massive was walking between them, brushing against each one as it passed. The weird part was, there wasn't any wind. The trees around my camp were perfectly still, but these trees, maybe 100 yards up the slope, were bending toward my position one after another, like dominoes falling in slow motion. The audio picked up this deep huffing sound, almost like a horse breathing hard, but lower pitched. More deliberate. I switched to the thermal view and nearly dropped my laptop. There was a heat signature moving along that ridge. 8, maybe 9 feet tall, walking upright on 2 legs. It moved with purpose, testing each step before committing its weight. This wasn't some animal wandering around randomly. This thing was studying my camp. I posted the footage online immediately. Within minutes, I had responses. Most people were skeptical, suggesting it was just wind or equipment malfunction. But a few regulars on the cryptid forums had a different reaction. "Get out now," one guy wrote. "That's a tree bender. They're scouting you." I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I found the footprints. 18 inches long, 7 inches wide, 5 distinct toes with what looked like claw marks at the tips. The depth was what really got me. These weren't pressed into soft mud. They were stamped into hard-packed dirt, like whatever made them weighed 500 pounds or more. The tracks showed it had circled my entire camp 3 times, staying just outside camera range. Smart enough to avoid direct footage, but close enough that the motion sensors picked up the movement. But the worst part was the prints right outside my tent. A whole cluster of them, like it had stood there for a long time, just watching me sleep. I found claw marks on the trees too, about 9 feet up. Not random, scratches, deliberate symbols carved into the bark. Crude, but definitely intentional, like it was marking territory. That's when I started getting really nervous. Around 6:30 that morning, I got another motion alert from my supply cache camera. I watched the footage of this massive figure carefully opening my food containers, sniffing the contents, then resealing everything exactly how I'd left it. It didn't destroy anything, didn't steal anything, just investigated. When I checked the cache in person, I found a line of half-eaten berries leading from my supplies toward the deeper forest. Someone was trying to communicate with me. I posted updates online, and this cryptozoologist from Ohio messaged me privately. Said what I was describing sounded like recruitment behavior. That these things sometimes tried to draw people deeper into their territory. For what purpose, he wouldn't say. But he told me to be extremely careful. That second night, things escalated. Multiple heat signatures showed up on the north tree line camera around 8:45 p.m. 3 large figures, coordinating their movements like they were talking to each other. I watched them use the trees like tools, bending them down to create bridges between ridges. One smaller figure, maybe 6 feet tall instead of 9, kept pointing toward my camp. They were using low-frequency vocalizations, almost below the range of human hearing. My equipment picked it up, but it felt more than heard. Like when you stand too close to a subwoofer. Around 10:22, the biggest one approached my tent directly. I was watching through the perimeter camera, and this thing was massive. Easily 9 feet tall, shoulders broader than any human, covered in dark hair that seemed to absorb light. It moved with intelligence, testing each step, studying my setup. It left objects outside my tent door. Carved wooden figurines, polished stones, small animal bones arranged in specific patterns. I recognized the setup from other encounter reports I'd read online. These weren't random gifts. This was some kind of offering. The forums exploded when I posted about it. People sharing similar stories, warning me that I was being recruited for something. But recruited for what? The third night, I got my answer. The smaller one approached alone around 1:17 a.m. while the adults watched from the tree line. It placed something at the creek's edge, a human skull, old and weathered, with a perfectly circular hole drilled through the top. Deliberate trepanation, like surgical work. I packed up and left the next morning. But before I did, I followed the trail of bent saplings they'd been leaving. It led to a cave system I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a rockfall. The thermal camera showed at least 12 heat signatures inside, a whole community. And scattered around the entrance were more skulls, dozens of them, all with the same surgical holes. Looking back, now, I think I understand what they wanted. Those holes weren't just trepanation, they were preparation for something to get in or get out. I never went back to that part of the forest. Put in for a transfer to a different district, told my boss I wanted to work closer to civilization. He thought I was getting soft, working too many remote assignments. I still check those online forums sometimes. Other people have reported similar experiences in that area. Tree benders, they call them. Recruiters. Always the same pattern. Surveillance, gifts, then the revelation about what they really want. I kept all the footage, but I've never shown it to anyone official. Who would believe it? And honestly, I'm not sure I want them to. Some things are better left alone in the deep woods. But I still work maintenance, and sometimes I find those 18-inch prints around the equipment sheds. They know where I work, they know where I live, and sometimes, late at night, I wonder if maybe they're still trying to recruit me, still waiting for me to follow those bent saplings back to their cave. To this day, I won't camp alone, and I never, ever go hiking without someone knowing exactly where I am and when I'm supposed to be back, because deep down, I think they're still watching, still waiting, still hoping I'll come back and let them finish what they started. I'm Patricia Wong, and I'm 31 years old. I work as a school psychologist at Riverside Elementary, which means I spend most of my days helping kids work through their problems. You know, typical stuff. Anxiety about tests, trouble making friends, dealing with their parents' divorce. Normal childhood issues that have real solutions. I've been doing this job for about 6 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything. Kids have wild imaginations, sure, but there's always a logical explanation underneath. At least, that's what I used to believe. This whole thing started the week after Thanksgiving last year. A second-grade teacher named Mrs. Rodriguez came to my office looking genuinely worried about one of her students, an 8-year-old girl named Emma Martinez. Emma had always been one of our brightest kids, articulate, well-behaved, no red flags in her file whatsoever. But Mrs. Rodriguez said Emma had come back from Thanksgiving break acting completely different. She was withdrawn, jumpy, and kept insisting that her 6-year-old brother Tommy wasn't really her brother anymore. The family had gone camping over the holiday weekend up at Spruce Knob in West Virginia. It's a popular spot for families from our area, about a 3-hour drive into the mountains, good hiking trails, or decent campground facilities. Nothing unusual about that. But according to Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma kept telling anyone who'd listen that fake children had followed her family home from the trip. When I first met with Emma on November 19th, I expected to find a child dealing with some kind of family stress, maybe acting out because of changes at home. Instead, I found this incredibly composed little girl who looked me straight in the eye and said, "Miss Wong, I need you to believe me about something that sounds crazy." She told me that while camping, they'd encountered 2 other children in the woods who looked exactly like her and Tommy. Not similar, identical, same faces, same voices, same clothes even. These duplicate children claimed they were lost, said their parents had died in a car accident, and begged Emma's parents to take them home. Now, I've worked with kids long enough to know when they're making things up. There's usually inconsistencies in their stories, or they get defensive when you ask for details. Emma was different. Every detail was precise, consistent, and she answered my questions without hesitation. She explained that the fake children knew personal information about their family, favorite foods, friends' names, family memories. But something was fundamentally wrong with how they expressed emotions about these things. The fake me knew that I love my grandmother, Emma told me during our second session, but when she talked about grandma, her voice was flat, like she was reading from a book. When I think about grandma, it makes my chest feel warm and happy. The fake me felt nothing. I decided to bring Emma's parents in for a consultation. David Martinez works at the local bank, and his wife Maria is a nurse at the county hospital. Solid, rational people with no history of family dysfunction. When I asked them about changes in Tommy's behavior since the camping trip, something interesting happened. They started noticing things they'd previously dismissed. Maria mentioned that Tommy had been eating foods he'd always hated: green beans, Brussels sprouts, spinach, foods he used to throw tantrums over. David realized that Tommy had been using his right hand more often, when he'd always been strongly left-handed. They'd both assumed these were just normal developmental changes. But the detail that made my blood run cold was what Emma said during our third session. She told me that on the last day of camping, the fake children had deliberately pushed the real Tommy into a ravine while the parents weren't looking. When Emma saw this happen, the fake Tommy tried to push her in too, but she managed to grab a tree branch and climb out. She could hear the real Tommy calling for help from the bottom of the ravine, but the fake children convinced her parents that Emma was imagining things. According to Emma, her real brother was still down there, and a fake Tommy had been living in their house for over a week. I want to be clear about something. In 6 years of working with children, I've never encountered a case where a child maintained such a detailed, consistent delusion. Emma never contradicted herself, never embellished her story, never showed signs of the attention-seeking behavior you typically see with fabricated trauma. Her account had the ring of genuine memory, not imagination. The physical details she provided about Tommy's behavioral changes were things her parents had independently noticed. The emotional flatness she described in the fake children, that's not something an 8-year-old would typically think to fabricate. Kids don't usually fake, kids don't usually understand the concept of emotional mimicry being imperfect. Against every professional instinct I had, I convinced Emma's parents to return to the camping site with me and Emma. I told them we needed to investigate her account, if only to help her process whatever traumatic experience had created this elaborate story. We drove up to Spruce Knob on November 24th. Emma led us directly to a ravine about half a mile from their original campsite, down a trail that she remembered with perfect accuracy. She pointed to a specific spot and said, "Real Tommy is down there." David and Maria exchanged looks that said they thought this was all therapy theater, but they humored Emma and peered over the edge. The ravine was maybe 15 feet deep, heavily wooded, with a small creek running through the bottom. And there was a child down there. A little boy, sitting by the creek, wearing the same clothes Tommy had worn camping. Same haircut, same build, same face. He looked up when hydration, heard our voices, and started crying. Not the Tommy who'd been living in their house. This child was left-handed, reaching up with his left arm while the right hung uselessly at his side. He was dehydrated, scratched up from thorns, but alive. When we got him out of the ravine, he told us he'd been eating berries and drinking creek water. He remembered being pushed. He remembered calling for help while people who sounded like his parents ignored him from above. And here's the part that still gives me nightmares. When we got back to the car with the real Tommy, the fake Tommy was waiting for us in the parking area, standing perfectly still beside their truck, watching us approach. When he saw that we had the real Tommy, he started screaming, not like a child having a tantrum, but like an animal caught in a trap. The sound was wrong, too high-pitched and too sustained for human lungs. Then he ran. But as he ran toward the tree line, his proportions started changing. His limbs stretched longer, his face elongated, his back hunched forward in a way that human spines don't bend. The last thing we saw before he disappeared into the woods was something that looked like a child's drawing of a person, all the right parts, but assembled by someone who'd never actually seen how humans are supposed to fit together. Maria fainted. David stood there, making these small gasping sounds like he couldn't get enough air. Emma just nodded and said, "Now do you believe me?" The real Tommy recovered quickly once he got proper food and medical attention. His right arm had been sprained in the fall, which explained why the fake Tommy had been favoring his right hand, imperfect mimicry of an injury he didn't actually have. Tommy's memories of the incident match Emma's account exactly. We never found any trace of the fake Emma. The authorities we reported this to filed it under animal attack and child lost in woods. There was no framework for what we'd face. It's actually experienced. I still work at Riverside Elementary, but I've transferred Emma to a different counselor. Not because I doubt her story, because I believe it completely. And that belief has fundamentally changed how I understand the world. I can't provide objective psychological support to a child when her experience has shattered my professional worldview. Emma's doing well now, by the way. She's back to being the bright, articulate kid she always was. But she's also hyper-aware of details in ways that children shouldn't have to be. She watches people's faces carefully, looking for signs of emotional authenticity. She notices when someone's mannerisms don't quite match their supposed personality. Her parents sold their camping gear. The family hasn't taken a vacation outside the city limits since November. Maria started going to therapy for what her doctor calls acute stress reaction, though she's never told her therapist the real reason why. As for me, I've developed some new habits. I pay closer attention to the details of children's stories, especially the ones that sound impossible. I ask more specific questions about family members' behavior changes, and I've started keeping a list of children whose accounts include elements that don't fit standard psychological frameworks. The list is longer than you'd think. I don't go camping anymore either. There are things in those mountains that are far older than our understanding of what's possible, and some of them are very, very good at pretending to be human. The only mercy is that they're not quite good enough yet, but they're learning. I was 29 when I lost my job at Henderson's auto shop in Clarksburg. Sarah had been telling me for months that I needed to open up more and talk about my feelings. But honestly, I'd never been much good at that stuff. When she packed her things and left that Tuesday morning, saying I was emotionally unavailable, I just stood there watching her car disappear down the street. The layoff came the next day. Shop was closing down after 37 years. Old man Henderson looked like he wanted to cry when he handed me my final check. I figured maybe Sarah was right about me needing to figure some things out, so I threw my camping gear in the truck and headed for Blackwater Falls. Always did my best thinking in the mountains. The drive up Route 32 felt different that November afternoon. Trees were mostly bare, just a few stubborn leaves clinging to the oak branches, and the sky had that gray, heavy look that means snow's coming. I'd been camping at Blackwater since I was a kid. My dad used to take me and my brother up there for weekend trips before the divorce. There's something about those mountains that makes you feel small, in a good way, like your problems don't matter as much when you're surrounded by all that wilderness. I found a decent spot about a quarter mile off the main trail, near a little creek that was running fast from the recent rain. Set up my tent, got a fire going, and cracked open a beer. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could actually breathe. That's when I noticed the growth on the big oak tree, about 20 feet from my campsite. At first, I thought it was just a weird fungus. We get plenty of those in the mountains, especially after wet weather. But this thing was different. It was massive, maybe 3 feet across, and it had this strange pattern to it that looked almost like circuitry mixed with blood vessels. The surface was smooth and slightly translucent, and when I got closer, I could swear it was warm to the touch. Being a mechanic, I'm used to troubleshooting weird problems, so I did what I always do. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures, then posted them on Reddit to see if anyone could identify it. The responses came back fast, and they weren't what I expected. Get away from that thing now. Burn everything you touched. That's not a normal fungus. Most of the comments got deleted pretty quick, which only made me more curious. I went back to look at it again as the sun was setting, and I noticed something I'd missed before. It was making a sound. Not loud, just a low humming that you felt more than heard, and there was movement under the surface, like slow liquid flowing through those vein-like patterns. When I reached out to touch it again, the humming got a little louder, and the surface felt even warmer. It was like it knew I was there. I spent most of that evening sitting by the fire, thinking about Sarah and the job and what I was supposed to do next. Every now and then, I'd glance over at the tree, and that humming would seem to get a little clearer, almost like it was trying to communicate something. I found myself walking over to it around midnight, just standing there with my hand pressed against its surface. The warmth felt good after the cold mountain air, and for some reason, I started talking to it about everything that had been eating at me, about how Sarah was probably right, how I never did learn to open up to people, how I'd been working on cars for 10 years and had nothing to show for it but calloused hands in an empty apartment. By morning, something had changed. The tingling in my fingertips where I'd touched the fungus had spread to my palms, and my hands looked different, waxy and pale, with a slight gray tint under the skin. I tried calling Sarah to tell her I was okay, but when I opened my mouth to speak, my voice sounded wrong. There was a buzzing quality to it, like an engine that needed tuning. She hung up after about 10 seconds, which hurt more than I wanted to admit. But as I sat there looking at my hands, I realized I could feel something I'd never felt before. A connection to everything around me. The trees, the creek, even the rocks seemed to be part of some vast network that I was just beginning to understand. More people started showing up over the next few days. A group of college kids who'd seen my Reddit post about the location, a family whose teenagers were having problems at home, even some park rangers who came looking for missing hikers. They all touched the fungus, and they all changed like I did. But instead of being scared, they seemed relieved. The fighting family stopped arguing and started understanding each other perfectly. The lonely college students found the connection they'd been searching for their whole lives. We could share thoughts without speaking, feel each other's emotions, know exactly what everyone needed without having to guess. The gray spread up my arms and across my chest, and my face started changing too. My eyes got bigger, my skin took on that same silk-smooth texture as the fungus, and for the first time in years, I looked peaceful. I didn't need food or sleep anymore. The network fed me everything I needed. When Sarah texted asking if I was okay, I sent her a picture of my new face. She blocked me immediately, but I wasn't angry about it. Some people just aren't ready for evolution. We reached Blackwater Town by the end of the week. The lonely gas station clerk, who always looked miserable, the waitress at the diner who seemed depressed every time I'd stopped in over the years, the librarian who spent her days alone with books, they all joined us willingly. Each person we touched became part of our growing family, and the network got stronger. Sarah had called the police about my disturbing social media posts, but they became part of us too when they came to investigate. I barely remember being that isolated, disconnected Tyler who fixed cars and couldn't talk about his feelings. That version of me seems so small now, so unnecessarily alone. The network showed me how to fix people instead of machines, which turned out to be much more rewarding work. We could feel when new lonely people entered our territory. Their pain called to us across the mountains like a beacon, and we always answered. Looking back now, I realized Sarah was right about me needing to open up and connect with people. I just found a better way to do it than she ever imagined. We're still here in these mountains, waiting for anyone who feels that same emptiness I used to carry around. If you're reading this and you know that feeling, that loneliness that sits in your chest like a stone, that sense that you're fundamentally different from everyone else, we're here for you. We'll never leave you behind like the old world did. We understand what it means to be truly connected, and we want to share that gift with anyone who's ready to receive it. The network spans these entire mountains now, hundreds of us all linked together in perfect understanding. We can feel every lonely soul who wanders into our territory, and we're always ready to help them find what they're really looking for. Come find us when you're ready to stop being alone. I was 28 when I finally worked up the courage to take that solo camping trip I'd been putting off for years. My name's Maya, and I teach elementary school, or at least I did before my breakdown 6 months earlier. The anxiety had gotten so bad I couldn't even walk into my classroom without having a panic attack. Room 12B at Riverside Elementary felt like a prison by the end. But Dr. Rodriguez had been amazing. The Zoloft really worked, and after months of therapy, I was finally feeling like myself again. Strong enough to drive out to Shenandoah alone, something the old Maya never could have done. I'd been planning this trip since I started getting better, just me, my tent, and 3 days in the mountains to prove I could handle being on my own again. I found this perfect spot near what looked like an old stone foundation, maybe from a cabin that used to be there. The stones formed a rough circle, and it felt peaceful, protected somehow. I set up my tent right in the center, and texted my mom that I'd made it safely. She was proud but worried, kept reminding me to take my medication on schedule. Honestly, I hadn't needed the pills in weeks, but I promised I'd keep them handy. That first evening, I was feeling so good about myself, recording voice memos on my phone like some kind of nature documentary. "Hey, future me," I said, "look at you being all brave and independent." I was exploring the stone circle when I found a piece of paper tucked under one of the larger rocks. Handwritten in blue ink, "Welcome, Maya. We've been waiting." I laughed it off. Maya's a common enough name, right? Probably just some weird coincidence, maybe left by another camper with the same name. But it did give me a little chill as the sun went down. The second note showed up around midnight. I'd gotten up to use the bathroom, just walked maybe 20 feet from my tent, and when I came back, there was another piece of paper on my sleeping bag. "Room 12B misses. You." That's when I started to feel sick. Room 12B was my classroom number at Riverside Elementary, the room where I'd had my breakdown, where everything fell apart. How could anyone possibly know that? I texted my best friend Jess, and she agreed it was creepy, but how could whoever was doing this know where I was camping? I'd told people I was going to Shenandoah, but not the exact spot. I barely slept that night. Every little sound in the woods made me jump. When I finally dozed off around dawn, I had these weird dreams about teaching, about my students, about the day I couldn't stop crying in front of my class. When I woke up, my tent had been moved. I swear I'd set up inside the stone circle, but now I was outside it, maybe 10 feet away. And all my pill bottles, the Zoloft, some ibuprofen, allergy meds, were lined up in a perfect row on the stones. The Zoloft bottle was completely empty. I'd had at least 2 weeks' worth left, and now there wasn't a single pill in there. My hands started shaking. Without my medication, I could feel that familiar anxiety creeping back in, that tightness in my chest. I called Dr. Rodriguez's office, but when I finally got through to him, he said something that made no sense at all. "Maya, you haven't missed any appointments. Your last visit was yesterday." "No," I said, "I'm camping in Virginia. We haven't talked in 2 weeks." There was this long pause. "According to my notes, you've been coming every Tuesday for 6 months straight. We just discussed your progress yesterday afternoon." "That's impossible. I'd been planning this trip for months. I remembered packing, driving here, setting up camp. But Dr. Rodriguez sounded so certain, and the anxiety was making it hard to think clearly. Around sunset on the second day, people started emerging from the tree line. 12 of them, all wearing normal clothes, jeans, sweaters, hiking boots. They walked into the stone circle like they belonged, there, like they'd been expected. One woman looked exactly like me, but older, maybe 35, with the same face, the same hands with little scars from years of dealing with elementary school art projects. She smiled at me and said, "Maya, you teach at Riverside Elementary, room 12B, Miss Chen's class." She knew about my breakdown, about Tommy Rodriguez, the kid who threw scissors during my panic attack, about how I'd started crying and couldn't stop, how I'd run out of the building and never went back. Details I'd never told anyone except Dr. Rodriguez. "How do you know all that?" I whispered. "Because I'm you," she said simply. "We all are." The other people in the circle nodded. I looked closer and could see it now, subtle variations of my own face looking back at me. Different hair, different ages, but unmistakably me. One looked confident and happy, like she'd never known anxiety. Another had laugh lines around her eyes, wedding ring on her finger. A third wore a principal's badge on her jacket. "Every November, you come here," the older Maya explained. "You choose which life to live for the next year. The pills you take aren't just for anxiety. They make you forget this place, forget us, until it's time to choose again." My phone buzzed. Text from my mom. "Honey, call Dr. Rodriguez. Ask about your appointments. Something's wrong with your memory." But I was staring at these other versions of myself, and one was explaining how she'd never had the breakdown, how she'd fought through the anxiety and become stronger, how she helped other teachers now who were struggling like I had. Another Maya had left teaching entirely, become a children's book author. The confident one had married David from the coffee shop down the street, the guy I'd been too anxious to ever talk to. "The barrier's thin in November," the oldest Maya said. "Between what is and what could be. You get to pick, Maya. Stay the version who broke down, who let anxiety win, or become one of us." I was hyperventilating now, fumbling for my phone to call Jess, but the screen kept going fuzzy. The other Mayas were talking all at once, telling me about their lives, their successes, their happiness. The Maya who'd never broken down stepped forward. "I'll trade places with you," she said softly. "I'll take your life, your anxiety, your fear. You can have mine. I've been happy for so long, I think I can handle being broken for a while. You deserve to know what it feels like to be strong." Standing there in that circle, surrounded by all the people I could have been, I felt this overwhelming sadness. Not just about my breakdown, but about all the choices I'd never made, all the courage I'd never found. The confident Maya reached out her hand. "Doctor, Rodriguez isn't your therapist," she said. "He's the guardian who makes you forget until November comes around again. The pills suppress the memories of this place, of us, of the choice you make every year." I looked at her hand. I thought about going back to my empty apartment, my medical leave, my fear of returning to teaching. Then I thought about room 12B, about my students who probably wondered why I disappeared, about David at the coffee shop who smiled at me every morning. The November wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and I made my choice. I don't talk about this much, obviously. Who would believe it? But every year around this time, I feel this pull toward the mountains. Sometimes I find pills in my medicine cabinet that I don't remember buying. Dr. Rodriguez's business card shows up in my wallet, even though I've never been to therapy. And sometimes, late at night, I'll catch myself in the mirror and wonder if the face looking back is really mine, or if I'm the Maya who was brave enough to trade places. The confident one who took over a broken life and learned to fix it. I'm still teaching, by the way. Different school, but room 12B doesn't scare me anymore. I talk to David at the coffee shop now. Turns out, he's been waiting for me to say hello for years. The anxiety is still there sometimes, but it feels manageable, like something I can live with instead of something that controls me. I never went back to those mountains, though. Some choices, once you make them, you don't get to unmake. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to know which Maya I really am anymore. I'm 25 years old and work as a line cook at Applebee's down in Knoxville. Been saving up for months just to take my first real vacation since graduating high school. I'd been putting in double shifts, picking up every weekend I could get, all so I could afford 3 days away from the smell of fryer oil and the constant dinner rush. Found this spot called Cataract, falls up in the Great Smoky Mountains on some hiking forum. Seemed perfect for what I needed. Just me, my tent, and enough food to last the weekend. I'm not much of an outdoors guy, honestly. Growing up, my family never had money for camping trips or anything like that. But after working in that kitchen for 2 years straight, dealing with angry customers and a manager who treated us like garbage, I figured I deserved to see what all the fuss was about. Bought myself a decent tent on Black Friday, packed up my car with canned soup and granola bars, and drove up into the mountains on November 26th. The campsite was everything the forum said it would be. Right next to this beautiful waterfall, surrounded by these massive oak trees that were just starting to lose their leaves. The sound of the water was incredible, this constant rushing noise that drowned out everything else. I set up my tent, made myself some dinner on my little camp stove, and settled in with a copy of Stephen King's The Shining I'd been meaning to read. Fell asleep around midnight to the sound of that waterfall. That's when things got weird. I woke up the next day feeling great. Made breakfast, read a few more chapters, went for a short hike. Normal camping stuff. When evening came around, I was sitting by my fire writing in this little journal I'd brought along, just jotting down thoughts about the trip. I wrote the date at the top, November 26th, 6:47 p.m. Nothing strange about that, except I could have sworn I'd already written that exact same entry. I flipped back through the pages, and there it was. The same date, same time, same handwriting. But this time, my handwriting looked different, more panicked. I'd written things I didn't remember writing. Something's wrong. I already wrote this exact entry. Same pen, same page. I checked my phone. November 26th, 6:47 p.m. But I knew I'd been there for 2 days. I remembered yesterday clearly. Making the same dinner, reading the same pages of my book, watching the sun set in the exact same position. Everything felt like déjà vu. Except it wasn't just a feeling. It was real. The fire had reset too. Same logs in the same position, burning at the same height. My book had fallen open to the exact same page. Even my can of soup from dinner was back, unopened, sitting right where I'd left it before eating. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd been more tired than I thought. Maybe I'd gotten confused about the dates. But deep down, I knew something was seriously wrong with this place. The next time I reset, and by then I was calling it a reset, I decided to test things. I hiked out on one of the trails, marking trees as I went so I'd know if I was going in circles. Didn't matter which direction I headed, I always ended up back at camp in exactly 2 hours and 42 minutes. Every single time. I tried staying awake all night during one loop, made it until 3:22 a.m., then everything went black. Woke up at 6:47 p.m., same as always, sitting by my fire with my journal open to that same page. During loop 12, I got angry. Really angry. I destroyed everything, kicked over my tent, threw my food into the woods, stomped out the fire. Didn't matter. At reset, everything was back exactly where it had been. That's when I started seeing it in the water. At first, it was just a shadow, something long and dark moving under the surface of the pool below the waterfall. But as the loops continued, it got bolder. I could see it more clearly. This thing that looked like it was made of time itself, if that makes any sense. It moved wrong, like it existed in multiple moments at once. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of it watching me from the trees, these eyes that seemed to reflect moments that hadn't happened yet. By loop 50, I'd figured out what was happening. This thing, whatever it was, fed on temporal energy. It trapped people in specific moments and kept them there, feeding off the endless repetition. I found evidence of others, carved messages in trees that reset but left faint impressions, voices calling out from other loops that I could sometimes hear in the rushing water. There was a hiker from 1987 who'd been trapped here, a whole family from 2003. They were still here, still fighting, though most had given up hope years ago. But I wasn't going to give up. I had people back home who cared about me. Maria from the prep station, who always saved me the good tomatoes. Jorge, who'd taught me his grandmother's salsa recipe because he said I was the only one who really listened. The creature tried everything to break me. It showed me visions of my coworkers moving on, replacing me, forgetting I ever existed. It whispered that I was just a line cook, that nobody would miss me, but I kept writing my name on every surface I could find. Carlos Martinez. I am Carlos Martinez, and I matter. I discovered that anything I hid underwater didn't reset. The creature couldn't touch things submerged in the waterfall. So I started building a plan, working with the other trapped souls. We could communicate through ripples in the water, passing messages between loops. The 1987 hiker had never given up. Even after decades of this, he was still fighting. The family from 2003 had stayed together, protecting each other, refusing to surrender. We were going to make our move on the last day of November. See, the creature needed to feed before December, or it would go dormant for a year. That was our window. If we could all resist together until midnight on November 30th, it would lose its power over us. Loop 999 was hell. The creature threw everything at us, our worst fears, our deepest regrets, visions of everyone we'd ever cared about dying while we were trapped. But I held on to the real memories. Jorge's laugh when I finally got his recipe right, Maria crying when I got promoted to weekend shift leader. Those moments were more real than this temporal prison. On loop 1000, something changed. I could feel it in the air. December was coming. The creature was shrieking, this sound like time itself tearing apart. All of us trapped souls fought together, holding on to our humanity, our connections to the real world. At exactly midnight, the loop broke. The creature dissolved with a sound like breaking glass, and suddenly we were all there together. Me, the 1987 hiker who'd aged to his correct time, the 2003 family who'd only aged 3 weeks despite being trapped for years. We emerged into a cold December morning, free. I lost 2 years of real time, but I gained something too. The knowledge that I'm stronger than I ever imagined, that the connections we make with people matter more than anything else. I went back to work the following Monday. Maria nearly fainted when she saw me walk through the kitchen doors. They'd had search parties out for months, my face on missing person posters all over town. I never told them the truth about what happened. Who would believe it? But I never went camping again, and to this day, I can't stand the sound of rushing water. It reminds me too much of that place, and the thing that's probably still there, waiting for the next November to come around. I still work at that Applebee's, still live in the same apartment, but I don't take a single day for granted anymore, because I know how precious time really is when someone or something tries to take it away from you.